Hi, this is Brennan Davis from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm going to be talking about Frankenstein tonight. Before I do, I just want to let people know that Strange Tales of New England is in layout. It's pretty much done. I'm just doing my remaining sweeps over the proofs, and then once that's okay, we'll do the cover design, and it should be good to go. But tonight, I want to talk about Frankenstein, the 2025 Del Toro movie that came out on Netflix recently. I didn't see it in the theater. I had to wait for it to come on Netflix. It was playing in my area, but I had to go into Boston if I wanted to see it, and Boston can be kind of a tricky place to get into these days. So I just because of traffic and stuff like that. So I decided to wait for it to come on Netflix, which I don't know, that might have affected my interpretation of it. Before I get into the review, I just want to say that these are like just my subjective opinions. I have very strong opinions about Frankenstein because it was my favorite novel growing up. And even though I might express my opinion strongly, I understand there are plenty of other ways to read the book. I understand that my way might not be like the predominant way these days either, so that's another thing to consider. And if you saw the movie and felt totally differently than me, or if you read the book and had a completely different take, that's totally fine. This isn't a criticism of people having different takes. I just have strong feelings about it. So those are going to come out if I'm talking about Frankenstein. And it's going to come out more than normal because a lot of times when I talk about movies based on books, I don't care if the movie it all connects to the book because I think it's a different medium. I think you can take whatever you want and make it into a movie. And I even think that with Frankenstein, but I do have to admit I have a harder time relinquishing the plot, the themes, and all that stuff when I'm talking about a Frankenstein movie, especially if it's one that kind of, if it totally deviates, it's one thing. Like if it's like a Hammer film, or if it's like the 1931 Frankenstein, that's kind of a whole other ball of wax. But it's the ones that get really close to it, or the ones that are either lauded as accurate adaptations, or ones where that was the stated aim. And so here, this was one that I think has been sort of praised as a by some people. I think that there's starting to be a slightly different take as more people are entering the conversation. But it was sort of depicted as a movie that really captured the essence of the novel. I liked the movie. I actually enjoyed it a lot. I'm not a Guillermo del Toro fan. I have a hard time watching his movies, so do take this review with that in mind, because I imagine people who really love his movies will have a much different reaction. But I quite liked the movie, but I didn't feel that it really captured the nuances of the themes of the book and and particularly the dynamics between the creature and the creator. And again, I'm going to get into why I like this movie. So I'm going to kind of start with some of the negatives, and I'll get into why I like it. But and again, if I were rating it, I would give it like an 8 out of 10. So even though I'm going to start here with some critiques and some opinions, understand that I really did like the movie, and I'm just nitpicking about my own feelings about the book. So one of the things that I saw when the movie first came out was a lot of people, and I've seen this expression expressed many times before, but it got expressed a lot around this movie, which is Victor is the real monster. And that theme is actually explicitly stated in the movie. I would say in a kind of heavy-handed way, which I think detracted from what they were trying to do. I think it's fine if they want to have that theme, but I feel like the way that it was expressed in the movie, it felt like a sledgehammer in the dialogue. But that idea is one that I don't agree with. I think it's much more complicated than that. And I think if you read the book and you say Victor is the real monster, you then have to weigh that with the fact that the monster is a child murderer, and that the monster has framed a woman for the murder of the child, and that the monster has murdered Frankenstein's wife, Elizabeth, on their wedding night, and that he murdered his friend Clerval. There's all these wicked deeds that the monster does that don't just go away simply because Victor wasn't a great guy. And so in the novel, I do think Victor comes off very badly. He's not a likable character. He's very self-absorbed. He's got just unchecked ambition's the wrong word, but this kind of hubris uh, to make a living thing, and he's willing to go to great lengths to do it. And then when he actually achieves it, he just completely abandons the creature, and he enters into almost a catatonic state for an extended period, and he has to be nursed back to health by Clerval. And it's just he's just not a he just doesn't he's not heroic, that's for sure. He's definitely not heroic, and he's definitely he has he's very responsible for many of the things that happen in the book. And then when the creature does start killing his family, it's all kind of made worse and directly caused in a way by his or at least indirectly caused by his sin of omission, where he doesn't explain what he's done. And so the people around him don't have any idea of the danger that they're in. He could have said something in order to save Justine, for example. So I think that, and again, it's a book, and so it's trying to build a drama, but I think that he's intentionally presented as not a super likable character. But the creature's not likable either. What they both are is they're both sympathetic. You can identify with both of them. They're both very compelling figures, and they're both kind of like, different sides of the same coin. And so, I at the end of the day, I think that the monster in the book is the creature. I think that Victor is monstrous, and I think you could describe him as a monster. I think maybe what you could say is they're both monsters, and neither needed to be a monster. That had Victor taken care of the creature more, that perhaps he would have prevented him from going on these killing rampage and just all the awfulness that ensues. And if Victor had just simply not even attempted to do that in the first place, none of this would have happened. So So I'm not saying that Victor is the hero or Victor is a nice guy, but I think people take Victor's level of responsibility, which is definitely there, and they exaggerate it to the point where all the stuff that the creature does is forgotten. I would just encourage people, and it's been about a year and a half since I've read the book, and the Del Toro version is based on the 1818 version of Frankenstein, which is the one that I like and the one that I'm largely basing these thoughts on. The 1831 version is a little bit different, and so that might not necessarily all apply here, because it does address things in different ways. But I think that that if you go and you read, I think it's chapter 16. It might be chapter 8 if you have it divided into 2 volumes. Like, it might be chapter 8 in volume 2 or chapter 16 in the full version. But if you read that chapter where the monster explains what he did, and he particularly talks about the killing of William, read that section, and then decide if you still think that the real villain is Victor. I think that you can make an argument for Victor being a villain. I just don't think you can make an argument for him being the villain. It's just what the creature does is just too monstrous. And he actually in that passage after he kills William, and in the book, William is much younger than Frankenstein or Victor, and a child when this all happens. But after he kills William, the creature says how exalted he feels. And so it's not like it's all, it doesn't appear to be something where he's doing it in ignorance. It doesn't appear to be something where he's doing it and it's making him feel awful. There are passages later where he kind of alludes to that, but in this moment he seems to be enjoying that he is venting his anger at Frankenstein by killing his brother. And so I just don't think I don't think it's a good analysis of the book. I don't think that it's a fair treatment of what she's presenting in the book, and I think that it's kind of like a sloppy moral reasoning to elevate to elevate his evil so highly that aspect of the creature is forgotten or excused because the creature had a rough life. I mean, I think that the creature is very sympathetic in the book. One of the greatest things about the book, and one of the most compelling things about it, is it's eloquent. It has a whole section where it gives its account of the story. So in that respect, the Del Toro version is accurate in terms of how it presents the two halves of the story, and it includes a lot of the stuff that's from the book too. So the creature is I think one of the greatest literary villains ever created, and so I also think that when you take away the villain status of the creature, you're actually diminishing the creature, because Victor's really not as interesting of a character as the creature. Victor's interesting in a lot of ways, but he's not somebody that is as nearly as compelling as the creature, and so I just don't see the value in it either. So that said, that's my quibbles with how it deals with themes, and I apologize if I'm coming off strong with it. And also, again, if you disagree with me, that's fair. I mean, again, Frankenstein is a work of art. It can be read a number of different ways. I'm sure there are plenty. I've seen plenty of people take the position that Del Toro is taking. So it's not like he's taking a position that's like wildly out there. I just have always found that take to be a little bit distasteful and not terribly accurate to the book. I apologize. I was just receiving a text which I have to respond to, but yeah. So and so to get back to the movie, it makes a lot of changes. I really enjoyed watching the movie. As I was watching it, I was having these reactions to it, and I was having these strong opinions, and I was kind of having a conversation with the movie, which is why I led with all that stuff. Because I think that a good movie will make you do that. And so even though I disagree with what the movie has to say about Frankenstein in a lot of respects, I think that it did a good job of getting me as a viewer to engage what it was doing and to think about it. And ever since I've seen it, I haven't really been able to stop thinking about this. And so to me, that's always a sign of a well-done film. It looks great. I just to throw out some more things that I might quibble about, and again, this is going to be spoilerish, but the monster has a kind of superhero-like quality. I've heard people comment on that, and it definitely has sort of a Wolverine, Jack Harkness thing going on. I had the uneasy feeling they might be trying to set up a series or a series of films with the creature as, sort of a kind of strange superhero set in the 18th century. I don't know, they probably weren't doing that, but that was sort of an uneasy feeling I had. Some of the other changes they made, they shifted a lot of the things that the creature, or that Victor does in the movie. So, for example, in the movie, and this is a big spoiler, Victor is the one who was actually responsible for Elizabeth's death. You could argue in the book that in a way Victor is responsible, but in the book, the creature murders Elizabeth. So, it's kind of, to me, that's kind of a cheap way to sort of slide. If the movie is trying to make the case that Victor is the real villain, but it does so by shifting one of the major crimes to Victor, and I feel like that's a little bit it gives an impression about the book that is, and again, they're not doing the book beat for beat, but I think if your point is that you're making this argument about the story, and then you present a different details in that story, that's a little bit of something worth objecting to in terms of just the conversation around the themes. But I have to say, I really liked the creature design. I thought it was interesting. In the book, and I'm going by memory here, but in the book, the creature is actually described as he's trying to create something beautiful, and it is until it animates. And then when it opens its eyes, that's when he really sort of realizes what he's done. And so it's kind of walking this strange line of being a thing of beauty and a thing of a sort of a, repugnant creature. And so I think that this movie leans more into the beauty. It certainly, it almost at times, and this is going to sound like an odd comparison, but it almost at times reminded me of the Rocky Horror approach to it, where there was just kind of a heartthrob thing going on with the creature. That actually didn't bother me because I think that fit with what they were trying to do with the movie. But it's a notable difference. I loved the section dealing with the creature at the homestead. In the book, it plays out similarly, but he doesn't get as much time with the old man. And in this one, he kind of gives readers of the book, I think, something they've always longed for, which is for the creature to have a real relationship with the old blind man. That in the movie goes on for some time, and I thought that was very well done. You can't make that change without altering the rest of the story, I think, and so it sort of fits that the creature has a totally different outcome in this one than in the other one. But I have to again, the creature design was great. The laboratory was, again, and in the book there's not as quite as much detail around that. He kind of alludes to everything, and he talks about getting parts from charnel houses and things like this, and you get this impression that it's an assemblage of human and animal parts, but the details of how it's done are not really crystallized. But I think what they were going for here with the tower and the laboratory was paying homage to the 1931 Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein and stuff like that. And so I thought it did do a good job of that. There's also even a little bit of homage, I think, to the Kenneth Branagh Frankenstein, which is honestly probably there are versions of Frankenstein that are more true to the book that are maybe lesser known, but in terms of mainstream movies and like high budget movies, that's probably the one that's the most accurate. It still has some significant changes, but it's closest to the book, I think, much closer than this one for sure. And that one lands differently with different people. It's kind of a hit or miss movie, and it's a movie where when I first saw it I really liked it, and then I kind of fell out of love with it. But then recently, going back to see it again, I actually really enjoyed it this time. So I don't know what it is about that movie that it has that effect, but it seems to get generally positive reviews, but also some strong negative reviews. And I think a lot of that has to do with the time it was made and Kenneth Branagh, some of the choices Kenneth Branagh made. But overall, I think it's a good movie. And so here, I really liked the homestead sequence. I did like sort of how they presented the creature in nature. That was a very interesting aspect of it, because it is kind of part of the book, but it's not something that a lot of movies dwell on as much. And I thought they did a really good job of it here. Now there's a really interesting change. So the whole Victor section is totally different from the book. In the book, Victor, he's basically raised in the lap of luxury, as he is in this movie, but his family is very loving. The abuse stuff that we have in this movie isn't there, and so it creates a totally different character, I would argue. But the more important changes are Elizabeth. Depending on the version you're reading, she's like his cousin and adopted sister, or he's his not cousin and adopted sister, and the mom kind of arranges for them to be married, if I remember. But in this version, it's just basically him and his brother William. There's no Clerval, and Elizabeth is another. It comes from a whole other family and is married to William, not to Victor. And they introduce a new character, her uncle, who's this kind of arms dealer played by Christoph Waltz. And I had very mixed feelings when I saw the character introduced. He's kind of extraneous. He does have some very important moments, but he's a little bit extraneous to the plot. However, I really like Christoph Waltz. I think that he's always very likable, and he's one of these actors who is very good in scenes where there's any kind of dialogue going on. And I thought that the interactions with him and Victor worked very well. Especially, again, I'm going to spoil it, but it's revealed. So he's basically the guy who funds Victor's experiments, and it turns out that he's doing it so that he can achieve immortality because he's dying of syphilis. And that all kind of comes to a head the moment that Victor is successfully bringing his creature to life. And so it's kind of a weird scene. It has some very interesting elements, but it's also kind of like, you're not sure why this is happening now. It feels kind of odd that the Christoph Waltz character is making this particular request at the very moment that the experiment is about to be a success. It just, I mean, it feels like you could wait a week and make it later, because the all of the important parts of the experiment have been are in place, and so it's just kind of an odd moment to have that particular thing happen. But I didn't mind that character. I thought it was interesting that they got their bodies from the battlefield and things like that, because he was an arms dealer and he used to be a military surgeon. The character of Elizabeth I wasn't as into in this one. She felt like a Tim Burton character to me. She was fine. The actress did a great job, but she just felt a little bit too. I don't know. I think that I think they kind of wanted her to be like the voice of moral reason, and and they also used her to kind of take the creature in a romantic direction. But it's kind of like the '92 Dracula in a way, which is a movie I really do like. And here I didn't think that the romance stuff worked as well for me. I liked that she was sympathetic to him, but the romance stuff, I don't know, it was a little bit odd. And I think that and again, the language I would use is that her character really feels like a Tim Burton character to me, and that felt a little bit out of place in this movie. Again, I'm not the biggest Guillermo del Toro fan, so maybe I'm missing something about his style of filmmaking. But just, I've seen like maybe 2 of his films, and in both cases I had trouble getting through them. And this one I thoroughly enjoyed. But for the tone of this movie, it just felt a little off. And yeah, so I liked the visuals of the film. There were things about it that I didn't enjoy as much. It kind of leads with a big action sequence, which I wasn't a big fan of. This is a very dialogue-driven story. There are some action-y scenes in it, but I kind of felt like something I would see in a... I'm not a huge like Marvel Universe fan or any of that kind of stuff, and I felt like it was playing more to that crowd, which again, maybe that's a smarter choice. But as a viewer, I kind of wanted a more restrained introduction to the creature. And I do get that what he was trying to do was present him as this really horrifying thing and then reveal that he's actually this very sympathetic character. But I just kind of would have preferred a slightly different take. In the end of the movie, it's very schmaltzy. It's clearly a very personal thing for the director, and so I can't criticize him for that. I thought it was a little bit too sappy for me in terms of in the book. It's very powerful the way that it ends, and it ends on a very sad note, I would say, and this ends on a much more optimistic note. And so maybe people will like the optimistic note. I will say, in its defense, it's all about forgiveness and absolution, and I think that that's something you don't often see in a lot of movies, and so I thought it was interesting that that's ultimately one of the core themes of the movie. But I just really like the way that the book ends on this wonderful minor chord, and it's very powerful. And I felt this was a little bit more comforting, and so I think I'm just a fan of the Frankenstein story ending in a kind of dour way. It's not all good news, spoilers. Victor does die at the end of this one as well, but it's just that he dies in a way where he's able to apologize to the creature, and again, this is probably because Del Toro is kind of doing with Victor and the creature what he did with the blind man and the creature, where a lot of people, I'm sure, when they read the book, they want that experience of Victor actually telling the creature he's sorry and feeling the sympathy for the creature that the reader does. And so I understand why he might have done that. It just wouldn't have been how I would want how I wanted the movie to end. And so the visuals were amazing. And I was very wary of this movie based on the visuals, because I thought and again, I don't mind movies that get lost in that kind of thing. I think that can be uh, a really important aspect. It's a visual medium. But I was a little nervous that it was going to again get too into the direct, and I like Tim Burton, but too Tim Burton-y, where the style sort of takes me out of the Frankenstein story, and it never quite did that. The only time I kind of had that feeling was with Elizabeth, and that was more about characterization, not visuals. But I thought that the visuals were beautiful. I kind of went in prepared to kind of be critical of them, and I was not. The movie was not boring. It was slow paced, but it was not a boring movie. I was engaged every step of the way. Even the parts that I didn't like engaged me. Do you know what I mean? So that's why I would have to say, even the things that I'm criticizing, I still have to give this movie an 8. Because I had a lot of thoughts and a lot of reactions that weren't always positive, but I was always engaged with the movie. And I still am thinking about the movie. So I feel like that, I feel like it was very well done as a result. I think that, one of the aspects that's interesting in this one is it's very much about the cycle of abuse. And again, I obviously had criticisms of that, which I think I explained earlier in this. But what ends up, the result is, and I have to say, I really like Oscar Isaac in this. I think that it's very interesting to pick him because he had this similar role in Ex Machina, and perhaps he's had other movies that that he was in that I'm unaware of that also feed into this. But that movie I kept thinking about when I was watching this, and I can see why they cast him. Because here he's really playing Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein, more as a brute and someone who's very capable of cruelty. Whereas in the book he's maybe more, self-absorbed and negligent. In this one he's pretty cruel to the creature. In a lot of ways I kind of didn't like that, but I still found it compelling. So it's sort of like one part of my brain was like, I don't think this is the way to go. The other part was enjoying it nonetheless. And so I think that, he just had a different take on it than I would have. It did land a little hard. So it's very difficult to like Victor in this movie, which is kind of the point. But one of the problems that does create for the film is there's no one to really, even Elizabeth is kind of not, there's until later in that first half at least, there's just nobody to sort of, there's no figure to really identify with, which again, it's still compelling though, so maybe he doesn't need that. And yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of anything else about this film. The guy who played the creature, his name is Jacob Elordi. I haven't seen him in anything, so I don't know anything about this guy. I thought he was really good. The physical performance was great. He just had this way of moving in an uncanny shape, and also his physique really worked for this. It reminded me of the cover of the Penguin edition of Frankenstein, the 1818 version. I have to wonder if that painting was in any way an inspiration. I know that they were going over the Wrightson, the Wrightson comics were a big inspiration here, and so it could be that, but I have a feeling somebody might have also been drawing on that painting. And if anybody hasn't read the illustrated Frankenstein by Wrightson, definitely check it out. I had it as a kid, and it was one of my favorite books just to flip through and look at the pictures. It really captures a lot of the key moments in the story. But Jacob Elordi, the physical performance, the emotional performance, everything was really great. Again, I had quibbles about the direction they took this creature in. But I thought he did a great job of keeping me interested in the creature and making me, feel what the creature was feeling, especially in those scenes with the blind man. Those are some of the best parts of the book, or parts of the movie. And I have to say, even though I've been critical of some of the things where it's gone away from the book, one of the areas where it really stayed true to the book, that even even the Kenneth Branagh version, I don't think did a good job with this, is capturing the eloquence of the monster. In the Kenneth Branagh version, the De Niro creature is certainly intelligent and can communicate like a man. But in the book, he's almost a poet because all of his understanding comes from reading things like Paradise Lost, and so he just has this way of talking that is very very flowery and romantic, and I think that I think this movie, once the creature starts speaking, it really does capture that well. So again, even though I've been critical of ways that the movie has handled the book, I think that it's very obvious that Del Toro read the book many, 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 many times, and had a lot of respect for it, and that he was very careful when he changed things or when he elaborated on things to do so based on stuff that's in the text. So I don't think that he's just going through there changing things because he wants it to be like this. I think that he's changing it in a honest, creative way. So I know I heard an interview with him, and I haven't really heard him say too much on the movie, but one interview, which actually made a lot of sense to me when I heard it, he talked about how he thought of Frankenstein as being very autobiographical with Mary Shelley. And he felt that it was therefore his duty to make his movie autobiographical. And so I think the changes are largely a reflection of his own experience. And so that made sense to me because I think that's a good way, if you are going to get creative with source material, to say, okay, I'm going to do what the original author did and now I'm going to make it mine. And so again, I had quibbles, which I clearly laid out at the beginning, but I have to admire the way he went about doing it, the creative process that he seemed to be engaged in here. And again, I'm saying this as somebody who's not generally a huge fan of his movies, and I'm not being critical of him as a director. I understand why people like him. I just have a hard time, connecting with his films. But this was one, maybe because he was so passionate about it, that I really enjoyed watching. And again, I have to say, I tried my best to check my biases. I have very, very heavy biases when it comes to Frankenstein. And I'm probably unfair when I look at a Frankenstein movie, especially one that's kind of getting praise like this one is. And so I went in, admittedly, with a with a little bit of an axe to grind. And I just found that by the end, the movie really had won me over. I wanted to get my points out about my disagreements with some of the ideas around the book. Not even so much as a reaction to what Del Toro did, because I think that it's totally fair for him to do what he's doing, but more as a sort of just because I've seen so many people saying things that I just don't agree with the book. It's one thing to talk about the movie, but I think when they then transfer that to the book, that's where I kind of feel a little bit like people are missing some of the crucial elements of that book. And again, I get that we can all have different opinions about it. But I think that the movie is very good. I don't know how I'm going to feel about it on rewatch. I have a feeling this will be a movie that I'll go back to. I certainly it's now lodged in my head in my library of Frankenstein movies. So I will probably be going back to it. At some point, I may give it another watch. I might want to write some of these thoughts down and do it on the blog. I already kind of have a half-written thing, but I feel like in text it comes out too harsh, and so that's why I wanted to do it this way. But if my wife wants to watch the movie, I might rewatch it. It's a long movie, so it might be a tall order. But yeah, I would, again, I know I've been going on forever. I apologize. I definitely would recommend people check this movie out. It's, number one, if you have Netflix, it isn't going to cost you anything except for what you're paying for your Netflix subscription. And there's frankly a lot of crap on Netflix, and this is like a really good movie that's worth your time. So definitely check it out. I think it's even worth, I don't know if Netflix puts things out on Blu-ray or whatever, but I think it's worth getting on Blu-ray too. And I feel like one of the reasons I laid out my critiques and my strong opinions at the beginning is because I wanted to show that despite having that kind of a reaction to it, this movie is still so good that it wins me over. I think there will be people who can't who have trouble with the changes from the source material, and there will be people who just won't like the direction he took it. But overall, I imagine this is going to be a very well received film. I think a lot of people are going to like it. I also feel like this movie, again, the way that I evaluate movies is emotionally, and how a movie makes me feel, and how it affects me. And this movie had a very big effect on me. And so, so just as an example, the next day I picked up Paradise Lost again and just started reading it. I don't know if I'm going to sit through and read the whole thing again, but I had this sudden interest to just read Paradise Lost, then maybe even go and reread the 1818 version of Frankenstein, and then the 1831 version. It really got the story in my brain. It also, as I was thinking about some of my criticisms of the movie, I started to think, well, are these criticisms fair? And then I started going through the text and looking at the text, and again, it's not like I've reread the book in an afternoon or anything, but that's just a really, good sign when a movie does that to you, especially if it's a movie where you have all these criticisms of things it's doing, yet you can't help but watch, and you can't help but stop thinking about it, or not stop thinking about it. So I also. I just that's the way that I react to movies is that reverberating effect it has in the ensuing days and weeks, and how I feel like I'm engaging the film just intellectually after I see it. And so I just couldn't really stop thinking about it. So even when it made choices that I was like, hey, I wouldn't have done it that way, or I think that's a bad idea, I had to engage with what he did. It was like it was all done in an interesting way. It was all done in a very sort of persuasive way in the movie. And so I will let you go before I peter out here. And again, if you disagree with me, that's fine. Leave a comment. I won't respond because I want to give people the last word on whenever they comment on something like this, because I know I laid out a bunch of grievances at the start. And if you've stuck with it to this point, I appreciate your time, because you could have read like half the book in this time, or watched half the movie. So maybe not half the book, but you could have read a chapter of the book at least. Which, by the way, I advise you to do. If you like the movie and you haven't read the book, now is a good time to read it. I suggest reading the 1818 version. It's the best version, in my opinion. It's also, my understanding is that's the version that he based the movie on. I think he said he used that as his Bible, and I understand. I share his enthusiasm for that version. You can read the 1831 version too, but just understand that injects a lot of ideas about fate and stuff, and it really does change the overall feeling and meaning of the book. And it makes some changes to kind of clean up some of the stuff to make it more palatable. There were some moral objections to certain things, and she made some changes. And also, she's a great writer. I read Frankenstein as a kid. I also, not as a kid, when I was in like middle school or high school. High school, I read it, and I also went out and read I think it's called The Last Man. I could have the title wrong, but she wrote a book, I believe, called The Last Man, which is much longer and a little bit more of a grueling read, but still I think worth reading if you're interested in Frankenstein. I think the story is the best horror story of all time. I think it's one of the greatest works of literature. I just love it. It had a profound effect on me when I read it, especially because I was so surprised by how eloquent the creature was. And it's also just the language, the ideas. Again, I'll depart, but definitely check it out. If even on audiobook, there's actually an audiobook version that's narrated by Kenneth Branagh, and I'm sure you can probably find it on YouTube. I don't know, you might have to buy it on Amazon or something. But I remember I read the book a bunch of times in high school, but I also got the Kenneth Branagh audiobook and listened to that too because I wanted to hear how he pronounced. I figured he's a Shakespearean actor. He directed the movie. I wanted to hear how certain words were pronounced. I wanted to see how certain conventions were done. For example, in the book, it doesn't specify the year; it just says 17, and then it gives like a slash to indicate sometime in the 1700s. And I was curious how somebody would recite that. So it's you might maybe you pick up the Kenneth Branagh audiobook and hear it that way. But yeah, so again, definitely check it out. 8 out of 10 for me. I'll maybe write about it. I'm just a little nervous that in text, some of my tone won't come through, and it'll seem more harsh than it ought to be. So that's why I opted for this first, and then we'll see. So until next time, I will talk to you later.